round three, Cryptocito. My guest today, yet again, Sergey. It's always a pleasure. This is the first time we actually talked was November 2021. Second time was November 2022. And now we're in March. Cryptocito subscribers have literally tracked the entire progress of Axelar since its inception. So yeah, thank you, Sergey, for being on again. How are you? How did you survive the last couple of weeks? Shaky markets, shaky banking sector. How are you guys doing throughout these times?
Great to be here and chat again, as always. We're good. I think it's been a busy couple of weeks across the board. Last week was certainly busy as well, but I think on the network side, things actually looked really solid. So yeah, happy to have gone through it and kind of continue to build again.
Yeah, I remember last time when we talked was literally right after the FTX collapse. Now we talk literally after a lot of banks are collapsing. Something that has been going on specifically with you guys recently was the InterOp Summit, which was a conference that you guys organized around ETH Denver. I've been in touch with you guys since you started thinking about doing that. It's been amazing to see how it all came together. I think we can never have enough physical events. I think it's very valuable to meet not just people within your own ecosystem, but also crossovers with other ecosystems and builders. So first of all, how was organizing the conference for you guys? I mean, that is a totally different experience, I guess, right? So how was that for you?
It was interesting, right? I think thankfully we had a lot of kind of partners and advisors, right, that actually helped us put everything together, and they took care of from organizational aspects of a lot of things for us. So we worked with a couple agencies. So that was very helpful, and like we could not have pulled it off without it. But there's still a lot of work, right? Kind of coordinating between, various actors and everything else. But just to kind of take a step back, right? Like I think the original motivation for the conference was actually try to get the ecosystem of builders across different layer ones, layer twos, different blockchains together to talk about what the future looks like, right, of Web3. And I think it was really interesting to see that narrative actually, or that vision is actually starting to take place now, right? And so I think it was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when they just attend a conference, they see, oh yeah, it's a 2-day event, it's a 3-day event, whatever. But like the amount of time and efforts that goes into planning even a 2-day or even a 1-day conference of that size, it's absolutely nuts. So respect for having pulled it together. I know it's not an easy task, but it looked amazing. I always said I wasn't there. I was at ETH Denver last year, couldn't make it this year. But I know there's always a lot of people, curious crypto people, builders, teams walking around, networking, announcements being made. So what was the highlights for you at InterOp or maybe even at ETH Denver itself?
So I think a couple of things, I think the event itself was really successful, right? From my perspective, we had over 1,300 people stop by, it was a packed house all the time. People were coming in and out. We had, builders, investors from layer ones to layer twos, dApp builders, and so on and so forth. So to me, that was really kind of one of the highlights, is that I think everybody's coming together to realize we are in a, multi-chain present now. It's not a future anymore, right? So let's figure out how to actually build in it. That's the best thing to me. Besides it, I think from our side, from Axelar, we announced a couple of interesting things. The launch of the virtual machine on the AXL network, some products that are building around it, like Interchain Maestro, Interchain Amplifier, with a goal of really helping to accelerate the interchain and kind of a cross-chain future, right? I think it was really well received. We had a lot of questions. We had a lot of discussions, and engaged a lot of builders along the way. Yeah, so to me, I think those were some of the big highlights that we kind of have gone through.
Yeah, you already mentioned the AVM that was announced. Can you explain a little bit further exactly what that AVM means, how it's a game changer? And I also saw like some people have brought up CosmWasm in that context and said AVM is really not much different than CosmWasm itself. So yeah, maybe can you explain what AVM is and how it differentiates to CosmWasm?
Yeah, I think just to take a step back, what was the motivation for building it, right? I think over the last couple of years, you see what the Axelar network kind of has done, right, for various ecosystems. We connected over 32 different networks live, everything from all the Cosmos chains, or a lot of the Cosmos chains, a lot of the EVM chains, most of the major EVM chains are live, Ethereum, Polkadot, right, Avalanche, Polygon, and the list kind of goes on and goes on. I think one of the things we have discovered as building this, there's still a lot of friction for building and scaling interchain, right? So friction number one, how do you make connections across new ecosystems, right? We have programmed it at the network layer to make very easy connections, with IBC and with like EVM chains, but there's a lot of kind of a one-off connections that have to be built across chains that support like zero knowledge proofs, right? Or chains that have very unique consensus properties. You actually have to have a very different kind of connection mechanic that you can utilize a lot of the building blocks from the AXL network itself, but it still work. So that's problem number one. And I think problem number two has been, the reality is that a lot of developers actually thinking about how do you build in the interchain, not actually doing that, right? So if you talk to the developers, they're saying 70 or 80% of their time goes into thinking, how do I deploy in this chain? How do I deploy in this chain? How do I connect the things together? What do I use for monitoring, right? Well, how do I pay gas, and so on and so forth? And so it's an array of questions, deployment, management, orchestration that developers actually spend 80% of their time on, and about like 20% of their time is actually then spent on building the application code. That's not what we want. So we wanted to turn it around where developers can spend most of their time thinking about how to build the application code, not the deployment process itself. And so the launch of the virtual machine on the AXL network was designed to solve these issues, right? So you'll be able to make your own connections to the AXL network and leverage its existing connectivity, right? So think about it. If you have a chain, if you want to connect it to something, and you know that's going to take you 6 months or a year to build that connection, you probably want to connect it to a network that gives you access to 20 other blockchains, right? Or hundreds of other blockchains, not just one. Because it's, otherwise you're going to have to repeat this 2 years of work over and over again for, forever. So that's one thing. And using the virtual machine, you can do those things. You'll be able to take your connection, plug it in with Axelar, and get automatically composability with everything else that's been connected, right? Kind of Axelar acting as a universal router across those chains. And so the second kind of a series of products that we're building is to help developers kind of orchestrate and manage their application deployments across all the chains. Right. So as an example, Uniswap has its own base, right? And they go chain by chain, replicating the same deployment process, right? And it's been taking them years, right? But it's very complex. Management of those contracts is complex. Any upgrades, any parameter changes, very, very complex stuff. And so kind of through the virtual machine at the interoperability layer, you actually have a very efficient model where you can orchestrate deployments across different chains with one click, right? You can say, this is my code. I want this code base to run on chain X, Y, Z, and W. I want it all to be connected and synchronized through the underlying interoperability. I don't have to think about it. If I have an upgrade, I just push an upgrade and it gets deployed everywhere, right? And so I think programmability at the interoperability layer allows you to do those things very, very efficiently. And Axelar is the kind of the one-hop shop, right, that you can go and do those things. So that was the original motivation. I think it's really, really critical to do that to scale the interchain itself. And then to your second question, kind of how is it instantiated? It is actually relying on CosmWasm instance, right? But it's hooked with the underlying consensus in a pretty unique way, right? So most of the functionality of the AXL network today runs at the network layer, right? And the Cosmos SDK layer. There is a router that kind of gives you access to connection. There are like translation layers at the network layer. There are various like multi-party cryptographic primitives and so on and so forth. And so to build the connections with other ecosystems, you actually need to expose some of those building blocks to the VM layer and kind of stitch them together, in a pretty technical way. And so the virtual machine is really a hybrid of like CosmWasm using for most of the runtime, but it's intervened with the underlying kind of Cosmos SDK and the Axelar protocol consensus layer to enable all of those functions to run efficiently.
So I think to your first explanation, I think that's really good and important to understand the difference also between multi-chain and interchain, right? To say like, instead of deploying the same app on 10 different chains, like you described, Uniswap, I think Sushi also, they do that. You can have one place where you launch and you have access to different ecosystems from there. I think this is very, very important to understand. And I think to your second point, as far as I understand, so this is basically an interoperable expansion to CosmWasm itself, the AVM. Can you explain maybe what type of connections or interoperability points you currently have with Axelar? I mean, I know, cosmonauts probably know that, but maybe for those that are fairly new to Axelar, maybe explain the current landscape of Axelar interoperability and what that AVM enables for developers.
So Axelar itself, you can think of it as a decentralized, network, right? That's responsible for connecting, different ecosystems. At the network layer, it actually supports multiple protocols, right? So there's we support IBC natively because we run on, on Tendermint and Cosmos SDK. We have a kind of cross-chain gateway protocol that we're built to connect with EVM chains, right? But one of the kind of key properties of Axelar network itself versus like individual pairwise connections, like IBC, is that Axelar is a sort of a hub, right? So that means that any connection that's made, it's automatically routable with, across all the other connections. So as an example, one of the properties that we also announced at the InterOp and is going live on the mainnet, like in a coming week or two, is the fact that you can completely compose all the Cosmos chains with EVM chains using like general message passing. Why couldn't you do this before, right? You couldn't do this before because Cosmos chains and EVM chains actually speak very different languages, right? So somebody actually needs to do the translation between them. Who is it going to do it? You can either put those translation logic at the edges at the application itself, and then everybody has to pay, gas for it, or you can put it at the network layer, and then it's much more efficient and much more gas effective, right? So Axelar Network does it at the network layer. And that means you can send a packet from a Cosmos chain, that packet will execute on Ethereum, and vice versa, right? So it gives you really, really complete marriage, right, of two very, very distinct ecosystems that I think going forward are going to be more and more united. So, I'm super excited about it. And so that's one of the properties of the Axelar network itself. And then, through the VM, like I said earlier, there's a kind of I guess, initial services that we want to be able to build. One is building these connections easier and easier, right, across the ecosystems. And we announced actually like an array of partners that will be launching with us over the coming months, everything from Coinbase, Mobile Coin, right, Centrifuge, Near, and like kind of the list goes on and goes on. So really excited to be able to connect all of those different ecosystems now. And the second point, again, is to help developers actually run their applications across multiple chains. The simple example to think about, we posted yesterday on our Twitter, is how to launch an interchain token across all the chains with one click. Right? So you can take a look at the video on our Twitter right now, but basically, you can specify the parameters of your token, you press deploy, right? And then that token is automatically deployed on, dozens of different chains. And it's really interchain. So it means that you can send it back and forth, through your wallets, right? Through your, bridges, through your dApp applications, whatever leverages it. You don't have to deploy any wrap tokens. You don't have to fragment liquidity or anything else. And so that's the type of experience that we're going after at the end of the day, is that as a developer, you can say, okay, this is my application. I want to ship it across all these ecosystems, still have it connected, and enable very simple user experiences that can interact with it.
I see sometimes people are reducing Axelar to a bridge, right? And whenever you hear bridge, we all have PTSD, right? Bridges just have a date when they get exploited, right? So can you talk a little bit about how Axelar is different, how you guys mitigate, just in general, before I ask you about Cosmos specifically, because there's also a lot of kind of dependencies on Axelar liquidity, Axelar bridge liquidity in Cosmos specifically, since you guys are also the canonical bridge basically for Cosmos, osmosis specifically. So can you explain maybe on a higher level, like how do you guys mitigate? What are the risk assumptions? How do you mitigate the risk of kind of like being exploited or withstanding that?
I mean, security is a complicated topic, right? And I think the right way to think about it is think about it full stack, meaning like it's not just about your protocol, it's not about some kind of a software implementation, but it's really, really full stack. And that's the approach that we've been taking. So at the core networking layer, everything is powered by proof of stake consensus. It's decentralized, it's secure. We actually implement things like quadratic voting to reduce stake of validators that concentrate on the network, to not give them a lot of power. But starting with a decentralized, protocol consensus that anybody can audit, anybody can take a look at, anybody can participate, is the base. On top of it, no matter what protocol, you're talking with, IBC, Axelar, or anything else, you have to build a pipeline of engineering practices, right, to make sure you don't have vulnerabilities. The reality is that most of the things that have been exploited in the space, not there because of the model, but because of engineering mistakes that have been made along the way. So how do you mitigate those things? And, you know, and we've seen those things over and over in all kinds of protocols, right? Like IBC had a bug last week that, you know, was thankfully patched, kind of thanks to the coordinated effort. So those things are inevitable. You have to think about them in advance, right? So how do you do that? You have to have audits. You know, we've done over 30 audits, spent like millions of dollars on them on the network layer, right? You have to have bug bounties. So we run like a multi-million-dollar bug bounty where if, you know, a developer or a white hacker can find something, they can commit, they can disclose it to us, they get paid, you know, it gets patched, the network continues. You have to have testing, right? Like no matter how many audits or things like that you do, you have to have unit tests, you have to have end-to-end tests, all kinds of practices that have been deployed throughout the software industry. You know, you have to apply it to the blockchain space itself. So that's the second layer. And then the third layer is what I call application security add-ons, right? So as an example, suppose we're transferring liquidity or value, right? Most of the time, you know, if you're transferring certain volumes of value, you don't need to, you know, allow the protocol layer arbitrary transfers of hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars, right? Like there's no such thing. So most of the time, you can actually put like rate limits on the value transfer per day, per hour, per month, whatever your granularity is. And so that's what I call as like application security add-on, right? It's specific to this application. For the value transfer, you can put things like rate limits so that in the worst case, when the underlying protocol or the network like has a vulnerability, your damages are mitigated. And then, you know, if there is a damage, then there's like a, you know, an insurance fund that can come in, but actually fill it in, right? It's not a $600 million hole or anything even close to that. So that's how we think about it. And so at the application layer, Axelar, I think we were one of the first networks to implement rate limits for IBC itself. We were one of the first, I think, protocols to implement rate limits for EVM chains that we all connect. And so these sort of firewalls and gates are across the whole stack end to end, right? And so that's how I think about it, because no matter what protocol you use, no matter how, you know, decentralized secure light client is, you have to think about the worst case and you have to think about the full stack approach, and that's how we've been handling it.
And just to clarify, rate limits basically means that you kind of like reduce or mitigate the amount, like in case of an attack, did you mitigate the amount that could be withdrawn over time, right? So that a potential hacker could not exploit everything at once, which basically buys time for the validators or whoever to take action, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it, right? Like worst case attack, I think we saw it during the Nomad hack, right? Where it was a very slow and granular and painful attack where everybody was tweeting about it, everybody was watching it, but nothing was there to stop it, right? So, you know, in cases like this, and there's a rate limit that would hit like the AXL network, you know, no transfers will be able to get processed. And then like, yeah, validators can shut down their nodes, or you can suspend the connection from a particular chain. There's all kinds of kind of mitigation efforts you can kick off from there. So your damage is capped. Damage, the rate limits that set is that it actually can be, you know, filled in by the insurance funds that we allocated to be able to deal with worst cases.
And especially in Cosmos, I already mentioned it. Axelar is the canonical bridge for osmosis, which by far is the largest IBC-enabled DEX platform in Cosmos. And I know a lot of people are really, really scared that, you know, Axelar poses this systemic risk for Cosmos, because if there would be some vulnerability, and maybe you can also talk about what is actually the main point of attack that somebody would have on Axelar. But how do you view that? Like, do you think that this is a fair point to make, to say Axelar is a real danger for Cosmos in terms of, you know, all the other bridge liquidity? And do you think there's, or like, what do you think would be a solution for that? Because I think it's not even your mistake, right? That you just delivered a great product that has strong product market fit, and competition doesn't seem to catch up on that.
I mean, so first of all, I think I would say something, you know, is that, look, like at the end of the day, when like Terra was, you know, collapsing and going down, and like Cosmos didn't have any stable assets or anything else, we enabled the connection to Cosmos and osmosis within 24 hours. So I think in some sense, I think everything you've seen and like the explosion that you've seen throughout the Cosmos ecosystem, I think, you know, is partially, at least thanks to the liquidity that the AXL network was able to bring in and out, right? The ecosystem cannot develop without it, and I think we were there with the right technology at the right time. So I think I'm pretty grateful for what we have built in the Cosmos ecosystem in general. That's one thing. The second one, I think, security is always a thing that you have to evolve on. We talk about it, I think, in the crypto or blockchain space as it's kind of a done deal whenever something is secure or not. But it's not, right? Like, the reality is, I've been building like cryptography and like secure systems for many, many years. It's always a game between, attackers and hackers and the builders, okay? And as a builder, you always have to think ahead, and you always have to think about mitigations. You always have to think about the strategies. Anything can have bugs, right? Like, we've seen it at the IBC, we've seen it at many other protocols, we've seen it everywhere, right? What do you do in those cases, right? Like, what are the mitigation things that you have to take in place? And so from AXL network, that's how we think about it, is, continuing evolution across the security spectrums. We actually posted a blog about kind of a multi-hop connectivity across the AXL network and other chains that would improve security even further, right? So as an example, let's say like today we connect to Ethereum using a consensus at the validator layer. When Ethereum has efficient like light clients, right, or zero knowledge proofs available, or anything else, you can actually plug those into the Axelar, into the virtual machine layer, and you can require stronger authentication of packets before you execute them, right? So as an example, if Ethereum has like a light client or zero knowledge proof, you connect it to Axelar, you instantiate a second connection. Now, when there is a value transfer of $100, you can approve it when any of these connections is good enough, right? But when there is a transfer value of $1 million or $10 million, then you can say, oh, I'm going to require both of these connections to authorize my transfer, and then I'll execute it, and then I'll mint like the coin on osmosis or something else. So, and then that means that you actually will be able to diversify your implementations, be able to augment security at the application layer, and end up with something very, very strong and robust. That's how I view this, right? I think there is a way to build interoperability by decoupling the right layers, by saying this is how the applications should interface with the interoperability protocols. But the transport and the routing layers will always improve over the next like 10, 20 years. I can guarantee you, no matter what happens. And so you have to be prepared for it, and you just have to evolve with it. I think for us, kind of this ability to utilize new technology when and if they're available across different chains, augment them with existing stack without breaking developer interfaces or without breaking any developer compatibility is really key to scaling the interchain.
You mentioned Nomad earlier. They obviously don't exist anymore because they got exploited. And back then, when there was this community vote about implementing the canonical bridge on osmosis, the other contender was Gravity Bridge, that is still around. Can you explain maybe, because like within Cosmos, I think there's also a lot of people that think that Gravity Bridge is underrated. What are your thoughts on Gravity Bridge, and how does it differentiate to Axelar?
Gravity Bridge was designed as a bridge between Ethereum and, Cosmos, right? I think Axelar, what we're trying to do is really build a network that can have many-to-many connectivity, that can have these translation properties, that can pass, general messages, that can execute your transactions across different chains. So it's just a very different stack, right? The goal is never to learn how to connect A and B. Okay, you can have the best protocol for connecting A and B. You can iterate on those protocols, use the best technology available. For us, the goal is how do you build an application that can scale across 100 of different chains, okay? And that requires a full stack. That's not just between how does A connect to B. It requires many-to-many connectivity. It requires this translation layer. It requires gas services. It requires general message passing, monitoring, and so on and so forth. And so that's really the difference, is that I think a lot of the bridges are approaching is like, well, yeah, how do I build a railroad between your city and my city, right? I think what we're trying to do is build like an air traffic control system that effectively can route you from anywhere to anywhere.
Another topic that's getting really big in Cosmos now, with the launch also of replicated security on the Cosmos Hub, is this concept of shared security. Last time I had Sunny on the channel, we had a debate between Sunny and Nick from Celestia about shared security and data availability and all these kind of things. He said, if I recall correctly, that there's some sort of partnership between Axelar and Osmosis to develop mesh security. I also think Juno Network is part of that working group. What is your specific interest in mesh security, and what's the state of the partnership with Osmosis?
One of the things as we evolve that becomes apparent is that we need to decouple kind of a consensus, right, and decentralization on it from economic security, right? And vice versa. We need to be able to couple economic security with a particular consensus or with a particular network, right? And so I think all of the concept of like shared security, mesh security, I think in Ethereum, there's a concept of eigenlayer that's sort of picking up. They have a similar flavor, right? So the idea is that if you have economic security on one chain, how can you benefit and take that economic security and benefit another network that may provide a lot of value or a lot of utility, and you want to secure it even more, right, at the network layer. So, you're right that kind of a mesh security is something we're exploring between, Osmosis, Axelar, and Juno. And the idea is to, be able to borrow and lend security across these different chains. Osmo token can be used to bootstrap security of Axelar. Axelar can be used to boost security of Osmosis, and vice versa, right? So it creates a decentralization, more, economic alignment at the networking layer, right? And that's what those initiatives are. I think a lot of them are still in the early phases. Frankly, I think like the Cosmos Hub and the kind of interchain security is probably leading some of the initiatives there, but still a lot of R&D has to be done. There's some questions from validators that are asking, do I need to run like one node, multiple nodes? What does my incentive for doing all these things look like? So I think all of those directions are in the early phases, but this is, I would say, as a general trend, right? This is where the industry is heading, right? Is being able to decouple kind of functionality from economic security and vice versa, couple it when it makes sense.
I think the core difference between mesh security and replicated security and the Cosmos Hub, as we have it now since a couple of days, is mesh security has this concept of interchain staking, as you described, right? Basically, that you have a token that can secure different chains and vice versa. And on the Cosmos Hub, replicated security means you have to replicate the entire validator set, which doubles the infrastructure cost and like overhead. They have to run a new server for every single consumer chain. So from your view, like, what are your thoughts? I don't know if you followed like the proposal 187, the implementation of it. What are your thoughts on replicated security? And you just said that mesh security still is in its early stage, but what do you think, like realistically, when we're going to see the first kind of launch of mesh security?
I mean, I think realistically and optimistically, second half of this year, but more practically, I guess, maybe early next year, right? That's my guess, at least kind of understanding the complexity of these things. Yeah, in terms of kind of how they compare, I mean, I think there are different trade-offs, right? And I think they serve different functions and different purposes. So, if you bootstrap in a network and you don't want to launch a token, you don't want to have to deal with, spinning up validators and so on and so forth, you can, replicate security, right? Like very easy. I think for use cases like, Osmosis and Axelar, it has a slightly different purpose. The purpose is that, you have two big networks on their own, right, that have economic security, that are providing value to each other. So it makes sense to bootstrap and exchange security, so you get even more security at the end of the day, right? So I think there are different use cases and different purposes for different mechanisms, and we'll kind of have to see what developers want at the end of the day.
So we talked about the AVM, we talked about shared security, we talked a lot about security in general. Sounds like you guys are very busy on multiple ends. As we enter soon the second quarter of the year, what's your roadmap? What's your short-term kind of focus, product-wise, development-wise? And maybe something that's in the works that's coming out throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the roadmap, can probably be summarized through the talk that we gave at the InterOp last week. So, I'll drop a link there as well. Basically, it's going to be focused around the launch of the, virtual layer at Axelar, making new connections across a bunch of different ecosystems. So we have a pretty deep pipeline there. And then finally, working through this, the interchain kind of a maestro services that we've been discussing, where the idea is to, again, like help developers actually build and deploy their applications across the Web3, right, and across all the different chains. So that's what the next year, I think, is going to look like. It's going to be, busy, a lot of services and a lot of products to build.
Let's do some questions from the audience. First one from someone somewhere. Does he think that CBDCs will be interoperable? And can you go over cross-chain app examples, Eli 5 style?
is CBDC going to be interoperable? It certainly must be if it wants to, if it wants to survive in this ecosystem, right? I think we've seen, with other stable coins, it's kind of inevitable that they launch on one chain and then they have to think about, well, how do I launch another chain, right? How do I go back and forth between them? I think like Circle has been doing a lot of that. It's grind for them, right? Kind of they don't launch on that many networks that often. It takes them a lot of time, a lot of effort, and then they think about how they make it interoperable underneath the hood. What does the protocol look like? So with things like we're launching like the interchain token that I just mentioned, all of those things can be one click, right, for the developers. So if you're building the CBDC, or any type of a stable coin, you want it to be interoperable. You want to have liquidity across all the chains. You want to make sure users can go in and out of it very, very efficiently, right? I mean, otherwise you just lose in distribution. So absolutely, they're going to be interoperable. And I think one example app that actually leverages interoperability of stablecoins, built on top of Axelar, is a Squid router. So you can kind of take a look and play with it. And it does it very, very uniquely, where it composes different dexes across different chains. So it's composed in a Uniswap, on Ethereum, with like a Uniswap instance on the, other chains or other dexes completely. But it uses like a stable coin assets underneath it as a routing asset to move liquidity in and out of them. I think it's very, very interesting use case. Gives you one-click accessibility to all the different ecosystems. You can do very, very simple swaps, and you don't have to think about bridging your coins, moving your coins, or anything else. And I think on that, actually, a very, very important property, kind of just back to the security question. So if you build your application in an interchain native way, you can actually mitigate pretty much all of the bridge security risk, period. The way that Squid Router, for instance, is instantiated, no wrapped assets are moved, no new liquidity is created. You are moving some liquidity for the moment of your swap, but then you always end up with the native assets on the source and destination chain all the time. Okay, you only take an ephemeral transit risk of the bridge when you're actually doing the swap, but once it's complete, all the funds, everything else is in the native wallets of their users. And so that's finally, I think, back to your point about the security and why we think it's important to think about deployment and building an interchain, is because it enables new developer paradigms that have very, very different properties, and you can mitigate actually most of the bridge risks if you build in the right architectures in the interchain. And I think that's incredibly important, and I think it's going to be super, super interesting to build these types of applications.
Interchain tokens, definitely very, very important stuff that you say there. By the way, just in general, how far you think we're away from the Fed dropping their CBDC?
Good question. Yeah, I don't know. Probably still a couple of years. I think they also announced what is it? The Fed. What is it? Fed Pay or Fed Pay? Yeah. So I think there's some people are saying that it's sort of competing with crypto.
It's interesting because China actually launched their ECNY, it's now called. I think it started as DCEP, went through some name changes, but I read an article about it. It already makes, I mean, it's not a lot, but like 0.13% of all cash and bank deposits, a couple of billions that are in this new CBDC that's already in circulation. I think the US is actually, I would say it's just a couple of months away, to be honest. But let's see. The race is on, and I think.
Do you want to make a bet? I claim it's not going to be in a couple of months.
You don't think it's going to? I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I don't want to make a bet on that, but I think I think that they are much further than we think in terms of building the technological layer for it. And I don't know, it seems like this whole stuff that's been going on now with Circle and all the crackdowns and regulatory, that's a weird coincidence. And I think, I think CBDCs are coming faster than we think. So yeah,
I don't think it's technical, frankly, for places like US, right? That's mostly kind of a political and legal question. Technically you can build it, using the right stacks. You can launch those things pretty efficiently now. It's kind of everything else that's around it, like what's the governance, what are the risks, what are the insurances around it that they have to, kind of think through. And I think those things will take, a bit more time.
Yeah, but could also be that they've just been working on it in the background silently. And they're just gonna drop a white paper
nice.
Sometimes. But yeah, another question I got, actually a couple of people have asked me that. Personally, I actually totally missed out on that because there were also a very small window. You guys actually did an airdrop, but I think the last category, which is for osmosis people, is still to come, right? So what's the state of the airdrop?
I think it should be coming soon. I think, yeah, everybody's been pretty busy over the last month and a bit, but yeah, I think it should be very soon.
Very soon. So I think there's a site to it. I'll find that and I will link it under this video. So keep track of that. Will Axelar be listed on Injective for trading? I don't know. Do you have any partnership with them or?
Believe Injected is connected with Axelar, when it comes to listings and things like that. Yeah, I don't know.
Larry is asking, can someone Eli 5 how Axelar deposit addresses work? How are they generated and what happens if I send funds to a wrong address?
Great question. The deposit addresses use kind of on the technical level, a create2 opcode from Ethereum that says essentially the following. You can generate a deposit address that has a program behind the scenes that will be executed when the funds arrive at this deposit address. Okay, so the Axelar kind of network and the services generate this deposit address for you that specifies exactly what you want to do with your funds. Right, so meaning that if you want to go from Ethereum to osmosis, the address that's generated is a function of your intent, which your intent is to go from Ethereum to osmosis, right? And that's how you get a deposit address. Once you send your funds there, then there's a program that's deployed on chain that actually gets executed that will then, take your deposit, route it to the Axelar protocol. Axelar protocol knows what to do with it. Will route it through the network all the way to osmosis, right? So that's how it works. Effectively, we're able to code the entire path of the user's actions into a program, and then deterministically generate an address behind this program. And as soon as the funds arrive in it, that program gets executed, and your funds, take its corresponding actions behind the scenes.
Cool. Yeah, I think I hope that helps. I think also we covered a lot of things today. So thank you so much for that. Any final stuff from your side that we haven't touched upon, or?
No, I think that's about it. Oh, I think one thing I'll mention, as a part of the initiative to scale interchain, we actually announced a 5 million grant program to help build new types of connections across different ecosystems to help scale interchain, right? So I encourage people to kind of check it out. Maybe I'll drop you a link as well. Sign up. The idea there is we're not looking for kind of this is not a program for DeFi building or anything else. We have other initiatives, and there's ecosystem funds for it and things like that. This is a program for people that are interested in consensus and cryptography and actually building kind of a connectivity tissues and protocols. Because I think it's very, very exciting innovations right now happening in that stack. So if you are interested, get engaged. Would love to work